full-time job, college degree, health insurance, the whole thing, and you still can't afford to move out of your parents' house. That sentence would have sounded insane in 1985. It would have sounded like a bad joke in 2005. In 2026, it is the lived reality of the majority of an entire generation. I want to say that again slowly. The majority, not a fringe case, not a cohort of people who made terrible decisions. When less than 30% of full-time young workers in major metro areas can afford a modest one-bedroom apartment, you are no longer looking at a personal finance problem. You are looking at a systems problem. There's a guy working 40 hours a week as a project coordinator somewhere in the Southeast, makes $55,000 a year. His rent is $2,200 a month. That's already 32% of his gross income, before taxes, before food, before the student loan payment, before literally anything else. And he considers himself lucky because he found something under $2,500. The median home price in Los Angeles is now roughly 12.5 times the median annual household income. In 1985, the median home cost around $82,800, while the median household earned $23,620, meaning a home was roughly 3.5 times annual income. The ladder didn't get taller. They removed most of the rungs. So here's the question I want you to sit with before we go any further. If you do everything right, you study, you work, you don't blow money on nonsense, and you still can't cover your basic costs on a full-time salary, is that a personal failure? Or is it a system running in a direction that was never built for you? We're going to explain exactly how the relationship between labor and cost of living broke down, why it's getting stranger over time, and what that actually means for the decisions you make with money right now. This is not a video about how hard life is for young people. I don't find that framing useful, and neither should you. What I care about is understanding the mechanics, because if you understand why the machine works the way it does, you stop fighting it head first and start going around it. Here is the central metaphor I want you to keep in mind. Think of the economy as a treadmill. For most of the 20th century, if you stepped on the treadmill, it moved at a speed you could handle. You worked, the belt moved, you kept pace. You didn't get rich overnight, but you didn't fall off either. You could afford rent, save a little, maybe buy a house in your 30s. The belt and your legs were roughly calibrated to each other. Then, starting around the late 90s and accelerating hard after 2008, somebody turned up the speed. But here's the thing. They didn't turn it up for everyone equally. The treadmill got faster for anyone whose income comes from their labor. Anyone who needs to show up, trade hours, collect a paycheck. For people whose money works for them, assets, property, capital, the belt actually slowed down. Because asset prices went up, which means the return came to them passively. So right now you have one group running faster and faster just to stay in place, and another group standing still while the belt moves them forward. That's the frame. Keep it, because everything else in this video is a different dimension of the same treadmill. Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers are genuinely shocking when you stack them side by side. Over the past decade, urban rents climbed about 4% per year, while wages for full-time workers increased by only 0.6% annually. That means it's harder than ever to live in a big city on a typical salary. Let me do that math for you in real terms. Take someone making $50,000 a year in 2015. 10 years of 0.6% annual wage growth gets them to about $53,000. Meanwhile, their rent has gone from, let's say, $1,200 a month to roughly $1,750. That's $550 extra dollars per month, $6,600 more per year, coming out of a paycheck that barely moved. Where does it come from? Credit cards, a roommate, parents, or a decision never to save at all, and that's just rent. The median house price in the US has risen about 90% in just 10 years, or more than 6% each year. Homebuyers need to earn $111,000 per year to afford the typical US home, about $25,000 more than the median household income. So buying a home on a median salary is by definition not achievable under conventional financing. Not barely achievable. Not achievable with sacrifice. Mathematically blocked. The median first-time U.S. home buyer is 38 years old, up from 31 about a decade ago. That is 7 years of life delay. 7 years of building no equity. 7 years of paying rent that enriches someone else. 7 years of not accumulating the single biggest driver of middle-class wealth that previous generations could access in their 20s. Just over 1/4 of Gen Zers own their home. compared to more than half of millennials and more than 70% of Gen Xers and baby boomers. And in some high-cost coastal markets, fewer than 10% of Gen Z workers can afford a one-bedroom apartment. Think about what that actually means. In those cities, if you take 10 people working full-time, not part-time, fewer than one of them can afford a one-bedroom alone without being financially strained. Everyone else is either doubling up, living with parents, or spending so much on housing that they have zero financial flexibility. The treadmill is running fast, and most people haven't noticed that someone changed the settings. Now here's where most people get it wrong, and I want to spend some real time on this. The popular explanation for why Gen Z can't afford anything is some version of they spend too much, or they make bad financial decisions. You've probably heard the avocado toast argument. In a slightly more sophisticated version, it becomes they're buying too many subscriptions, they're eating out, they're not prioritizing savings. This is not a story about young adults buying too much coffee. It is a story about a generation trying to build a life while basic survival keeps raising the cover charge. That argument, the individual spending habits argument, is not a financial analysis. It's a narrative that conveniently relocates a structural problem into individual behavior. It's easier to blame a 24-year-old's lunch choices than to explain how monetary policy, zoning law, and a 30-year political economy produced a housing crisis. Let me explain the actual mechanism, because it's more interesting. After 2008, the Federal Reserve injected enormous amounts of liquidity into the financial system. Interest rates went to near zero and stayed there for years. When money is almost free to borrow, assets, stocks, real estate inflate. That is not a bug, that is a predictable consequence of cheap money flowing into fixed supply assets. Who benefited? People who already owned assets. Homeowners watched their property values double. Stock portfolios recovered, and then some. The generation that was already in the game before 2008 saw their net worth compound in ways that had almost nothing to do with how hard they worked. Who didn't benefit? Anyone who was still in school during 2008, anyone who entered the workforce between 2010 and 2020, anyone who was trying to get on the ladder while the ladder was being bid up by people who were already on it. Add zoning to that. In most major cities, planning and zoning laws prevent developers from building enough to meet demand. Rezoning a plot of land from commercial to residential often requires mountains of paperwork. And in many cities, objections from neighbors can stall a proposed development. When you artificially restrict supply and simultaneously make money cheap to borrow, prices do one thing. They go up. That's not political commentary. That's supply and demand operating exactly as advertised. To be fair, the counter-argument exists. Wages have been going up too, right? On paper, yes. From January 2021 to July 2025, average hourly earnings increased by 21.8%. Meanwhile, the Consumer Price Index rose 22.7% over the same period, leaving real wages, the amount adjusted for inflation, down 0.7% cumulatively. You earned more dollars that were worth less, and that's the charitable reading. It doesn't account for the fact that housing inflated far faster than overall CPI. It doesn't account for student debt entering the equation at a scale previous generations never faced. What employers pay for health insurance is hitting a level not seen in 20 years, and a significant chunk of that gets absorbed by employees, either directly or in suppressed salary negotiations. When you stack all of that, the picture is clear. The treadmill is running faster, and telling people to run harder is not a solution. It's a distraction. Comedic cutaway. Random financial advice I've seen online. Just don't eat out for a year and put that money into an index fund. Cool. The average American spends about $800 a year eating out. An index fund returning 7% annually on $800 over 40 years gets you around $11,000. A median home in a major city now runs over $400,000. So the plan is working perfectly, we just need 36 more plans exactly like it. If you're watching this and it's clicking, if you want to understand how these systems actually work and not just how to feel better about them, subscribe. I put out a video every week breaking down exactly this kind of thing. The mechanics, the incentives, the actual math, no fluff, no hustle porn. Just the system laid out clearly. All right. Let's go a level deeper. We've established that housing is expensive and wages haven't kept up. That's the surface layer, and most people stop there. But there are two additional forces applying pressure to this generation specifically, and they get almost no serious attention in mainstream conversations. The first one is student debt as an entry tax. Here's the thing about student debt that the debate around it consistently misses. People argue about whether forgiveness is fair, whether borrowers should have known better, whether the degrees were worth it. All of that bypasses the structural point. Student debt is effectively a toll you pay to enter professional employment. You cannot access most white-collar career paths without the credential. The credential requires the cost. The cost becomes a fixed monthly obligation that reduces your financial flexibility before your career even begins. Let me put a number on that. The average student loan payment in 2026 lands somewhere between $400 and $500 per month, depending on the balance. That's money that cannot go to savings, cannot go to a down payment fund, cannot go into an index fund where it would compound. It's financial dead weight in the first decade of someone's working life. Precisely the decade when compounding interest is most powerful if that money were actually working. Your parents, statistically speaking, did not have that. In the 1980s and 90s, public university tuition in real terms was a fraction of what it is now. The debt burden that Gen Z carries into career entry simply did not exist in the same form for previous generations. That's not an excuse. That's a documented structural difference with real dollar consequences that show up in every financial model you run. The second force is what I'd call the invisible volatility premium. Gen Z entered the workforce during or immediately after three major economic disruptions. The 2008 financial crisis, which shaped their childhood understanding of money, COVID in 2020, which wiped out millions of entry-level and service jobs essentially overnight, and the inflation spike from 2021 through 2023, which eroded purchasing power for anyone living on wages. Three massive resets in roughly 15 years. And resets are asymmetric. People with assets get protection. Property values recovered, equity markets recovered, governments backstopped financial markets. People whose only asset was their labor absorbed the hit directly. Job losses, furloughs, reduced hours, stalled careers, and income they'll never get back. The treadmill doesn't just run fast, it occasionally surges to full speed with zero warning. And if you're standing on it without anything to grab onto, no assets, no savings buffer, no parental backstop, you fall off. Bank of America's 2025 Gen Z study found that 51% say the high cost of living is a barrier to financial success, and 55% do not have enough emergency savings to cover 3 months of expenses. That's not recklessness. When rent takes 40 or 50% of income, it becomes much harder to cover other expenses. There is simply no mathematical room to accumulate a buffer. Here's the reversal I want you to really think about. Most people frame this as Gen Z doesn't earn enough, but that's the wrong variable. The actual problem is that the fixed costs of basic life, housing, healthcare, debt service, have grown to absorb so much of any income level that the variable part, the part you actually control and can optimize, has shrunk to almost nothing. You can earn $60,000 a year. You can earn $80,000. If your fixed costs eat 90% of it, the remaining 10% is not enough to build wealth. It's barely enough to keep the lights on. The treadmill speed doesn't care how fast you personally run. It's set by forces outside your control, which means the only rational move is to change the game you're playing, not just put in more hours on a machine that's working against you. Let me make this concrete. I'm going to walk through the financial life of someone I'll call Marcus. He's 24, lives in a mid-sized major metro, not New York, not San Francisco. Let's say Atlanta or Denver. Expensive but not absurdly coastal. Marcus has a full-time job as a marketing analyst. He earns $60,000 per year. That sounds like a real salary. It used to be a real salary. Let's run the numbers. $60,000 gross divided by 12 months is $5,000 per month before anything comes out. After federal and state income tax, let's estimate a combined effective rate of around 22%. He takes home roughly $3,900 per month. His rent for a one-bedroom in his city, $1,700. That is already 44% of his take-home pay. Gone before the month starts. He's rent-burdened before he's bought a single thing. Student loan payment, $420 per month. He borrowed around $45,000 for a 4-year degree on a standard repayment plan. Car payment plus insurance, because he needs a car to commute, $380. Health insurance premium, his portion after his employer's contribution, $160. Groceries, utilities, phone, being conservative, $450. That's $2,510 in fixed obligations per month. Every month. No flexibility there. 3,900 minus 2,510 leaves him $1,390. Out of that, he covers gas, clothing when he needs it, any social life, any unexpected cost, and savings. If he saves 10% of what's left, already an optimistic assumption, that's $139 per month. $1,668 per year. Now, 75% of Gen Z say the rising cost of living has made it impossible to save enough for a down payment. Marcus is the reason why. To put together a 20% down payment on a median home in his city, let's price it at $350,000. He needs $70,000. At his current savings rate, with no emergencies, no car repair, no medical bill, no period of unemployment, that takes 42 years. He'd be 66 years old. He'd have a down payment right around the time he might actually be thinking about retirement. The math is not slightly off. It's broken. Is Marcus irresponsible? No. He's not flying to Vegas every month. He's not buying clothes he doesn't need. He has a job and he's trying to live like a functional adult. The treadmill is running faster than his legs can move. Not because he's slow, but because the belt speed was set by forces that have nothing to do with how hard he works. Now let's get to the uncomfortable part. Because everything I've described so far is a symptom. The cause is deeper. Here is the structural reality most financial content won't say plainly. In the United States, income from labor is taxed at a higher effective rate than income from capital. If you work and earn $100,000, you pay income tax that can approach 40% at the federal level, plus payroll taxes on top. If you own an asset that appreciates by $100,000 and you hold it for more than a year before selling, you pay 15 to 20%, roughly half as much. That differential did not appear by accident. It reflects a deliberate choice about which kinds of economic activity to reward. The tax code encourages owning things, it penalizes doing things. For previous generations, this was less consequential because there was still a viable path from labor income to asset ownership within a reasonable time frame. You worked, you saved, you bought a house in your early 30s, and then the system's preference for asset holders started working in your favor. For Gen Z, that transition point from labor income phase to asset income phase is being pushed so far into the future that the compounding math largely doesn't work. If you can't get on the asset side of the ledger until your late 30s or 40s, you've missed the most powerful compounding years of your financial life. The machine rewards the thing you can't yet access, and taxes the only thing you have. And then there's the inheritance dimension, which almost nobody talks about directly. Roughly $84 trillion of wealth is in the process of transferring from the baby boomer generation to their children over the next 2 decades. 84 trillion. That is the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in recorded history, and it does not distribute evenly. It flows to people who are already better positioned to receive it. People with parents who own property, own businesses, hold investment portfolios. So you end up with 2 completely different cohorts inside Gen Z itself. A minority whose financial trajectory gets a meaningful handoff, and a majority who inherit close to nothing and are building from zero in a system that has structurally raised the cost of entry at every level. This is the real divide, not young versus old. The divide is between people whose financial story includes a transfer and people whose financial story starts completely from scratch on a fast belt. And the particularly dark part is this. The system has no strong internal incentive to correct itself. The people who would need to vote for lower housing costs, higher capital gains taxes, or genuinely aggressive housing construction are largely the same people who own the assets that have inflated. Their net worth goes up every year the status quo holds. The incentive structure points directly away from the reform that would help. That's the machine, not villains. Not a conspiracy, just incentives flowing in a direction that compounds existing advantages and punishes new entrants. Understanding it clearly is the first step to not letting it quietly wreck your financial life. Comedic cutaway number 2. Financial independence at 30, they said. Just cut the lattes, they said. Me, doing the math, if I cut one $4 coffee every single day for a year, I save $1,460. The median down payment in my city is $70,000, so I need to avoid lattes for approximately 48 years. I'll be 72. I'll probably have a reverse mortgage on a house I never bought. But sure, No lattes. Here's a framework I want to give you for thinking about this, because frameworks are actually useful when a problem feels too diffuse to engage with. There are 3 mental traps that keep people stuck on the fast treadmill without realizing there's an off switch. Trap number 1, the effort trap. Most people were raised to believe effort linearly produces outcomes. Work harder, earn more, afford more. That relationship used to hold roughly. It is now significantly broken at the entry level because the cost floor has risen faster than the effort ceiling. You can max out your effort and still not close the gap because the gap is structural, not personal. The effort trap keeps people optimizing the wrong variable. More hours on the same machine at the same belt speed does not change the outcome category. Trap number 2, the patience trap. This is the flip side. Some people know the system is slow, so they decide to wait it out. They'll figure out money when they're older. They'll start investing when things stabilize. They'll think about buying when rates come down. Patience is rational. Passive patience is just deferred action dressed up as strategy. The compounding math does not care about your intention to eventually start. Every single year you delay converting labor income into assets is a year you cannot reclaim. The patience trap mistakes standing still for being smart. Trap number 3, the consumption trap. Here's the cruel irony. Gen Z is pouring funds into high rents and education costs, and then doom spending on essentials and small luxuries instead of saving up for bigger investments that feel unattainable. When people feel financially stuck, stressed, unable to see a clear path forward, they tend to spend more, not less, not on big things, on small, accessible moments of relief. That subscription, that dinner, that thing ordered at midnight, spending becomes a coping mechanism for financial stress, which then deepens the financial stress. The treadmill accelerates this. The faster the belt runs, the more you need a break from it, and every break costs money. None of these traps are about laziness or stupidity. They're predictable behavioral responses to a machine running faster than anyone designed it to. Understanding the trap is what lets you step off the treadmill rather than just run harder on it until your legs give out. Let me bring this back to where we started. Full-time job, college degree, and still can't pay the bills. Here's the analysis. That situation is not a mystery, and it is not primarily a personal failure. It is the mathematical output of a system where urban rents have climbed about 4% per year, while wages for full-time workers increased by only 0.6% annually. Where labor income is taxed at a premium relative to capital income, where the entry cost to professional life include a debt load previous generations didn't carry, and where asset prices were inflated by monetary policy in ways that benefited whoever was already inside the system. That is the treadmill. And now that you understand how the belt speed gets set, here's what you actually do about it. 3 practical takeaways, not generic, not motivational. Number 1, optimize for assets as early as possible, even in small amounts. The system taxes labor and rewards capital. So the priority isn't just earning more labor income, it's converting labor income into assets faster than feels comfortable. That means investing before you think you're ready, even when the amounts feel embarrassing. $15,000 invested at 22 beats, $50,000 invested at 35. The compounding math is violently in favor of early entry. An index fund, a small piece of real estate, any mechanism that moves you from the labor side to the asset side earlier than the average timeline. That's the game. Number 2, build at least one income stream that doesn't scale linearly with your hours. The treadmill is engineered for labor income. If everything you earn requires you to physically show up for a set number of hours, you are permanently subject to the belt speed. People who quietly escape it tend to build something where the revenue relationship to personal time is nonlinear. A second channel, content, a small business, digital products, a newsletter. The asset doesn't have to be physical, the structure just has to be different. This is not passive income in the fantasy sense. It requires real work up front. But the architecture means the compounding runs in a different direction than a paycheck. Number 3, stop optimizing for salary alone, start optimizing for ownership stakes wherever you can find them. The difference between a $60,000 salary and a $60,000 equity position in something is enormous over a 10-year window. One goes to zero the moment you stop showing up. The other can grow without you. When you evaluate opportunities, jobs, projects, side businesses, ask one question: which side of the ledger does this put me on? labor or ownership? The tax code already told you which one the system rewards. The treadmill is real, the belt is fast, and the best move isn't running harder, it's building something that moves you to the side that doesn't need to run at all. If you want to keep breaking down how these systems actually work, subscribe. New video every week.